Dear students, let us start the discussion on today's newspaper, that is 30th November 2016. Just I have a small announcement to make. A few of the students are asking me, do we need to read two newspapers daily? Now, I say it is a overkill. You fix yourself to Hindu, that is more than sufficient. But however, Indian Express covers certain important articles, especially in the explained page. So I tried to cover those articles in the video and listen to the video and take down the notes, that is more than sufficient. And the second thing is, where this notes gets updated, that is at laex.in slash civilsprep. So this is the website where it is getting uploaded. And the third thing is, with regard to my party affiliations or something, that is purely personal, and I want to say you this. My objective is to give you an opinion about something that is happening around us. And the second thing, we need to understand an article from the perspective of democracy, liberalism, etc. It means what the UPSC is expecting from us, to what extent we are directed by the constitutional values and its morality. So, are we in that alignment or not? And from that perspective, I try to explain the articles to you. So, coming back to the today's articles, the dashed expectations. Now, the demonetization drive was initiated, and what will be the consequences of this? How we need to take these consequences forward? In this context, as money coming into the banks is increasing, at least in the short run, the deposits in the banks are bound to increase. Tomorrow, once the dust gets settled, more people will withdraw their deposits back. But however, even if 10 to 20% of the total deposits, if they are retained in the banks, that is a huge sum for the banks to decrease their lending rates. And the second thing, obviously, the liquidity in the banking sector is going to increase. There is every reason that this increased liquidity may bring in indiscipline in the banking sector. So that's why the tightening of the money supply at the banks is necessary. So what are the steps before the government? Yesterday we discussed that rising the cash reserve ratio. So cash reserve ratio, it means what percentage of the money the banks have to keep with the RBI. On this amount, the banks will not earn any of the interest rate. But the tragedy of the banks is this: when CRR is raised, the banks have to pay the interest rates on the deposits, but they will not be gaining any interest rate from the RBI. So the banks always resent the rise in the CRR. During Y.V. Rao governorship, the market stabilization scheme was launched. In this, the banks are also, this is to suck out the excess liquidity that is existing in the market. That was the phase around 2003 2005. That was the phase when there was excess liquidity with people. So, by releasing these bonds, this excess liquidity is being sucked up. In those days, it is called as overheating of economy. It means that the excess liquidity has led to the increase in prices and other untoward ill consequences. But the market stabilization scheme, if need to be implemented, it has to be carefully planned. And liquid adjustment facility. Under this, the government securities are being sold to the banks and liquidity is sucked from them. But however, the government securities available are not sufficient today. So in this context, what the government is planning to do? The government is more inclined towards CRR. RBI is also inclined towards cash reserve ratios. Now, further moving towards this, can we expect the decreased lending rates from the banks, interest rates from the banks? The author says that in the short term, no, but in the long term, yes. What the reasons are? The first one is Indian banking sector is suffering from very high non-performance assets, especially the public sector banking. And second, the capital of the banks is very low. The banks can lend only to a proportion of their capital. So as capital is not more than 9%, then obviously the amount it can lend also decreases to that extent. And the third thing is, if the interest rates in India falls, then obviously it is going to decrease the difference in interest between US and India. So in such a scenario, the people will be more interested in investing US economy rather than Indian economy. And already after demonetization, there is a flight of capital from the debt securities in India, and the situation is expected to get worsened. And if you see the Trump, after the Trump has come to the power, then the fiscal deficit of United States is bound to increase. As fiscal deficit is increasing in US, the interest rates are bound to increase. Added to that, US Fed is also talking about raising the interest rates for the past 1 year, and this time it is bound to increase. Obviously, that will be an incentive for the flight of the capital. So, keeping this in mind, till certain stabilization happens, the RBI may not allow for the change in interest rates. Obviously, banks cannot do the same. And over the time period, yes, the lending rates by the banks are going to come down. And this is what the article talks about. A last chance for amnesty. Now, with regard to the black money, the government has given the income declaration scheme. After that, it has brought in the demonetization effort. Now, many of the people they tried to circumvent this demonetization scheme by depositing the money in Jandan accounts, by resorting to keep the people in line, hide people in the line, and also to exchange the money illegally. There are many other routes which have been followed for. Now, the government has come up with the last chance where a person can declare his income and pay up around 50% of the money in taxes to the government to save the rest of the 50%. Unlike this, if the government unearths the black money, automatically it's going to be around 85% the government is going to suck out. And finally, a step towards the change. It is about Nepal. Let us see the situation in Nepal. So 10 years back, a comprehensive peace plan was drawn where the Maoists are being brought in a constitutional framework. So now, even after 10 years, the instability in the framing of the constitution is continuing in Nepal. So understand there are three major parties today in Nepal. One is Nepali Congress, Communist Party of Nepal United Marxist Leninist, Communist Party of Nepal Maoist. Now, CPN Communist Party of Nepal Maoist plus Nepali Congress is in power, and the power arrangement is that the chief of the Maoist, Mr. Prachanda, will be the prime minister. Later, it will be shifted towards the Nepali Congress. And the CPN UML, it was represented by Mr. KP Sharma Oli, who was the previous prime minister to Nepal. In this context, during the Woli's term, a constitution was drafted and enacted by the Constitution Assembly, and Madeshis, they have voted against, or else I will say, they have revolted against that particular constitution. So, in that scenario, their major demands are: one is redrawing the provinces. Because of the existing provinces, in none of the province Madeshis are a majority. So they want to redraw of the boundaries so that in at least two of the provinces Maoists can have their own the Madeshis can have their own majority. And the second thing is the naturalization rights of the citizens. Now, most of these Terai region people, they have the matrimonial alliances with Indians. So, the naturalized people also shall get the constitutional rights to occupy the offices or to take up the constitutional offices. And the third thing is proportional representation in both lower house and upper house has been demanded by Madeshis. So, in this context, these amendments are introduced in the parliament, but however, to get these passed, a two-third majority is required, and Communist Party of Nepal United Marxist Leninist is nowhere ready to support this. And added to that, it claims that these are based on or these are due to a foreign hand. We can see it as it is indirectly hinting at India's role with regard to these amendments. And so Communist Party of Nepal United Marxist Leninist, Mr. Oli, he tried to play in China against India, and then the blockade, he described it as, and even it took it to the UN. So in these circumstances, there is a lot of bad blood created between India and Nepal during his tenure. Now, the federalism, how does it help? If we observe that the power sharing between communities, power sharing between regions, It is the best way to keep a nation stable. Historically, this is proven. If you take Belgium, if you take India, now if you take Sri Lanka, everywhere the power sharing between the communities is being promoted for. So, if you bring in a federal polity in Nepal, finally it will lead to greater stability in Nepal rather than being other way around. Now, the article is The Long Road to Mosul. Now, there is a fight which is going on in Mosul between Iraq army, Shia militias coming from Iran, and then Kurdish forces versus ISIS. Now, in this case, if you see the demography of Mosul, it's a million plus city, and most of them are Sunnis. Now, the government forces and everything, these are Shias, they are dominated by Shias. If the civilian casualties increases, that may lead to a resentment among the people against the government. And this resentment can be used by the ISIS to fuel the sectarian divide in the Mosul. So that's why, to what extent the government can withhold any of the atrocities by the Shia militias on the common people, and to what extent it can limit the civilian casualties, to what extent all these forces they can work combinedly or collectively against the ISIS determines the success of Iraq's war against the ISIS in Mosul. That's what the article talks about. Now, coming to the explained page. Now, what the Marrakesh has achieved. The Marrakesh COP22, its objective was not to bring something new but to frame the rules to operationalize the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So, in this context, there are various groupings which have come into existence and they have brought in some significant impact towards the climate change debate. And Marrakesh is very much significant as Trump has become the president. And in his election campaign, he said that he will move away from the climate change talks. In the Marrakesh, we have this International Solar Alliance moved by India. The objective is to bring all the countries that are living in, that are coming under tropics to harvest the solar energy, to develop new technologies, and to provide for standard procedures and processes in use of the solar energy was the objective of this. Around 26 countries have joined the International Solar Alliance. And coming to adaptation of African agriculture, you all know that African continent is worst affected because of the climate change. Through soil and water management, bringing the sustainable agricultural practices and food security is the objective of this group. And mission innovation, it is spearheaded by the United States of America. Around 23 countries are part of this, and $30 billion is being allocated for the research, and there are 7 focus areas with regard to this. That is development of solar cells, providing for green fuels, that is biofuels, and carbon sequestration and storage. All like this, there are 7 areas where they are interested in working on. And climate vulnerable forum, there are 48 countries in this. These are the countries which are worst affected because of the climate change. In these countries, they said they are ready to bring a climate action plan by 2020 and cut down their emissions by 50% by 2050, which is a very welcome move. And 2050 pathway platform, it is bringing a long-term vision towards fight against climate change. It is not just appealing to the nations, it is to the provinces, businesses, etc. to draw a plan for 2050. In this, almost 200 multinational companies are participating. Around 20 plus subnational groups are participating. In this, United States said on 2005 levels, it wants to cut down the emissions by 80% by 2050. And Germany said on 1990 levels it wants to cut down the emissions by 95% by 2050. These are the various groups that have come into existence and operationalized during the Marrakesh. These are the articles. Now coming to the notes. The dashed expectations. In spite of the bank deposit rise, the RBI is trying to raise the CRR, and this rise in CRR is going to decrease the fund availability with the banks. In the short term, the interest rates may not come down, but in the long run, yes. Finally, a step towards change. The Nepal government is bringing the amendments in the parliament, and these are for redrawing of the boundaries of the provinces, substantial recognition of the rights of the naturalized citizens, proportional representation in the upper house. But however, Communist Party of Nepal United Marxist Leninist is not supporting the same. And the major challenges in Mosul, the challenges are to decrease the civilian casualties, to provide for to gain the confidence of the people and to avoid the sectarian violence and to provide for a coordination among the different forces fighting the war. So then we discussed about the Marrakesh Treaty and what its achievements are. These are the articles for today, and thank you very much and all the best.